So my name is Zoe Clark. I'm Senior Self-Management Programme Officer at NASS, and today I'm delighted to have a slightly different Facebook Live to our usual session. Today we're having a bit of a conversation with two people living with arthritis. We've got Katherine Bloomer and Joel Nelson joining us, and we're going to be talking about their experiences of parenting and family life with arthritis. So hi to both of you. Thank you for joining.
Hi, good evening.
So before we get started and while everyone's joining, do you want to both tell us a little bit about yourself? Joel, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so my name's Joel Nelson. I've got psoriatic associated JIA, juvenile idiopathic arthritis, which I've had since around the age of sort of 10 to 12. I have a 3-year-old toddler, which has been quite the experience just on its own without arthritis. And yeah, I do lots of campaign and advocacy around arthritis and arthritis awareness. So say hello to everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And Katherine?
As you can probably see, I think I'm in deepest, darkest North Wiltshire. My name's Katherine. I'm the wrong side of 50. I've had AS since my early 20s, but I had it for quite a long time before I was diagnosed. And I have a son who will be 18 this September. So I've had quite a lot of experience now as a parent with AS.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to hear both your experiences having sort of different stages of parenting journey. And this evening, obviously, it is a really personal topic as well. So we've had a bit of a chat beforehand about what we're going to discuss. But for everyone watching, we definitely encourage you, if you're comfortable to, then do share your experiences, any questions you have, and any of your top tips as well about parenting with arthritis. Let us know in the comments. It'll be really good to get a conversation going and find support from each other as well. That can be really beneficial. Before we sort of get into a bit of a discussion, I will just say as well, obviously we don't have a rheumatologist on the call tonight, so we can't answer any sort of clinical or medical questions, unfortunately. So for anything in terms of medical questions, the genetic side of arthritis and AS in particular, then do please chat to your rheumatology team to get some personalised advice for that. And as always, we're recording the session, so you can catch up on the whole session at the end when we finish the live, either on Facebook, or we'll upload it onto our YouTube channel and our My AS My Life webpage as well. So I'm seeing quite a few people are joining us. Hi to everyone for joining live. And yeah, as I said, just let us know any questions in the comments as we go through. So I guess a good place for us to start would be discussing sort of how you prepare for parenting, parenthood, family life, and any advice you have for someone with arthritis when sort of looking to start a family. Joel, do you want to perhaps kick off with that?
Yeah, sure. I think my preparation for parenting with arthritis kind of set me up quite well for parenting in general, in that things didn't really turn out how I planned. In that I spent a long while working with my doctors, planning family with my partner, and with the doctors were sort of a key part of that. So we waited until I was off sort of drugs, sort of like methotrexate, and onto biologics, and I waited a long while until there was the information available and the studies, because like any new parent, I had lots of concerns, and one of them was about conceiving whilst being on some of those drugs. So my condition was very well controlled and very well managed when Dylan arrived, but that quickly changed. Part of that was through circumstances. Others was definitely a factor was stress. Like anyone, you've got this life that got to look after, and you feel like someone's going to stop you as you're walking across the car park because it feels weird just walking away out of the hospital with this little tiny thing. And yeah, within a couple of weeks of me becoming a parent, and whether it was the lack of sleep, the stress, the worry, whatever, I had a huge flare. And even though I'm technically 3 years on, I haven't got active arthritis now. I've been left in permanent pain from that very long flare. It's sort of 11 months long, whilst we got some of my treatment changed and switched back and everything. So I think I did plan, and I planned a lot, and anyone knows me won't be surprised by that. But then Dylan came along and the goalpost moved rapidly. So I think for a good example around that, I was playing rugby, I was running half marathons, I was super fit and healthy, and it felt like the best time to start a family. And within about 6 months, I was back on crutches, which I just wasn't really prepared for at all. So my sort of number one advice would be, you can plan, and please do, not just with arthritis in general, starting a family. But what I would say is, don't assume your here and now is what is going to stay, because we all know with flares and remission cycles and everything, the goalposts move all the while. And looking back, I really should have done a lot more planning around what happens if I flare, what happens if I lose my mobility, because I've been in a wheelchair in my youth, so I should have assumed that could have happened again, and I didn't. So that would be my takeaway: plan and involve your wider support network as well, not just your partner, your family, because ultimately you're going to need them a lot more if you flare and everything, especially if your other half is having to pick up the slack. And we all put a lot of guilt and pressure on ourselves with arthritis when we do flare, and it's just turned up to 11 when you're in that situation with a newborn. So yeah, plan, but please be really aware that your condition fluctuates, and have plans in place for what them different stages look like. I think would be my number one tip.
That's really interesting. Sorry, it's really interesting, Joe. You're saying plan. We didn't plan at all. Quite a different experience. We didn't think we were going to have children after 14 years of marriage. So pregnancy was a bit of a surprise. So there was no planning from that point of view. And to be honest, I was at my fittest and healthiest while I was pregnant. I loved being pregnant. I was really well. And not a single healthcare person talked to me about my AS, because I'd not had a firm diagnosis by then. Even though I'd been having symptoms for a good 15 years or so, nobody had pulled it all together. And it was only after I'd had my son, and he really didn't sleep very much at all for nearly 2 years, that I had the most enormous flare. He was probably about 6 to 8 months old, to the point where I get it in my peripheral joints, so my feet were really bad, so I was struggling to walk. And it was at that point I got taken in with the Mineral Hospital and started being pumped with some of these lovely toxic drugs. So I would say, yeah, I have a completely different experience from you. And the only thing that I was talked to about when going on to the drugs was how quickly I was going to stop breastfeeding. There wasn't any other discussion at that point. So that was 2004, 2005.
Gosh, that must have been really difficult not having the ability to discuss with people, because you hadn't got that diagnosis yet.
Yeah, nobody knew what. Yeah, they just didn't know. All they wanted me to do was to stop breastfeeding so I could have the drugs and then that was it. So yeah, so with two extremes, one planning and one not planning.
I think they both tie into that general feel though with arthritis, and that there is only so much that's in your control. And I think it's important to remember, whether you're a new parent or you're planning or you're worried about starting a family, put your energy into what you can control. If you know your triggers, you can work with your triggers, but you can't stop every flare. You can't align a remission at the perfect time with starting a family or anything like that. So I'd say, yeah, put your energy into what you can control, and communication's a big part of that one. Communicating with your partner about what status your condition is in at that particular time as well, because it is a very stressful time, which is inevitably going to be a trigger for most of the people watching this, I think.
Absolutely, yeah, and communication is probably one of the hardest things to do, but most important. And moving on to sort of into probably toddler years, I know a lot of people that I speak to who have questions about parenting with arthritis. A lot of the concerns are around kind of playing and sort of, being active in things when you've got a lot of pain and fatigue. Katherine first, is there anything that you found that, was helpful in terms of sort of playing with Aidan and still looking after your condition as well?
Yes, I mean, a lot of it involved sitting on the floor, So whether that was sitting on the floor, I used to have flip chart paper, and we would sit for hours drawing on flip chart paper, which he was very, very happy with, or playing drums on saucepans. And so it was finding things that he enjoyed and he was engaged with, that I could just still be on the sofa while he was doing things safely, I guess. We had lots of snuggle times. And as I say, he didn't sleep very well for the first 2 years, pretty much. So we had a lot of time reading on the sofa, and for him, that was completely normal. He didn't know anything different. So we had lovely time, and he's still an excellent reader now. So that was a real benefit, I would say, from that point of view. But then it was also being realistic about what I could and couldn't do. So going to toddler groups so that I could have a break and other people could run around after him. So we did things like tumble tops. Other classes are available. So we did that sort of thing. We did I don't know, church coffee mornings, and making sure that I went to friends who understood and I could trust that they would keep an eye, because I couldn't move quickly if you got in a difficult situation. So that was really important, and not to beat myself up about it. I offered what I could offer, and he had a great time, and he's great. So
absolutely, I really like that you said that. You know, he doesn't know any different. You know, that is your normal in terms of your family and the dynamic and the way that you spend time together. That's really nice.
Yeah.
And you mentioned reading, and Joel, when we chatted before, you said about how Dylan is actually, you know, amazingly far ahead with things like his numbers and his ABCs and things because of the amount of time you spent with him doing that.
Well, I think he deserves most of the credit. I just sort of facilitated his appetite. But I think, yeah, I think the important thing to remember of our condition is there is two sides to it. There's the physical and there's the mental. And Katherine touched upon that whole guilt thing. I cannot describe how much guilt and anger, frustration, everything that I was feeling in that first year. And I think Dylan arrived in January. By the September, I finally went to the GP to get some help with that, and I should have gone a lot earlier, and I sort of learned a lot from that. But it, you know, I was having things like nightmares in the middle of the night of I'd dream that I'd dropped him, or I'd fell down the stairs whilst carrying him, or, you know, he got hold of my injections, and all these silly little things that are all going on subconsciously. And I think we tend, like I mentioned earlier, we tend to be, you know, really critical with when you have chronic illness. You know, we feel guilty, we feel like we're letting people down wrongly 99% of the time. But that is how it is. And I think when you have a baby and toddler come into the mix, it's times 10, especially once their sort of personality starts coming out and they start getting mobile, you know, because my plans for Dylan was things like rugby tots and playing football in the garden and all these interests that I had, you know, when he arrived, that suddenly all went out of the window in less than 6 months. And I didn't really know who I was anymore or what my hobbies were. And I sort of felt a little bit ashamed because I kind of had this mental model of what sort of dad I was going to be. And then I suddenly couldn't. And I had to go through all that sort of stage of grief and everything else. And it was one of the reasons I started doing all this sort of thing, you know, just to try and, I don't know, be a better role model almost. But I think once you get past that point and get a little bit kinder on yourself and get help, because that was my big issue. I tried to wade through it for far too long, you know, and to the point where, like, you know, my nightmares were like jumping out of bed, running to his room whilst I was still asleep. So it was getting kind of silly. Well, I say run, hobbling. If I was running, then I probably wasn't as bad as I thought. But yeah, so I think you gotta learn to appreciate the little things. And like Katherine said, a lot of playing on the floor, because ultimately at that age, especially that sort of 0 to 3, I found, I can't talk beyond that because I haven't got there yet and I don't want to know what's coming either. Is that, you know, you are their world. All they know, think about, see is you. So when when Dylan was about 18 months, it coincided with shielding and I was stuck at home and I felt really guilty for that because he had to shield with me, so he couldn't go to nursery. And all these sort of feelings of like, I've ruined his life. You know, looking back, it was silly, but that's how I felt. And then you suddenly realise all he wants to do is cuddle, and all he wants to do is you make silly faces and lay on the floor. You can make silly faces and puzzles, and it kind of led, like Katherine said, into reading and letters, numbers, and shapes. Like this kid by the age of 2 was telling me what I think it was a quatrefoil or whatever. I don't even know what these shapes are, and he would get a square and turn it on its side and say, now it's a diamond, and he'd only just started speaking a couple of months before. And yeah, and today he's just turned 3 and he's now counting to 20 in Spanish and doing all this sort of crazy stuff that I can't keep up with. And I try to remind myself of that. Like, I'm my worst critic. I don't take compliments. I find it really hard to give myself credit, but that was a really tough situation, particularly with what's happened with the world the last 2 years, and I was sort of stuck in this box with him. And
you definitely had a different experience, because you were not then going to have people to help. So
no,
I was very careful. Neither of our parents are alive, so we didn't have grandparents to fall back on, but we chose carefully Aidan's godparents, and he has a hugely supportive godmother, and my aunt. Similarly, I would just go and drive to her house, and we'd spend a few days there, and they would do the entertaining, or just get the paddling pool out, so that you do get a bit of a break without feeling guilty. But you must have really missed that through
but it definitely contributed, and I realised the pandemic thing was a bit of an exception, but it was like my first taste of isolation. I felt like isolation as a child when I was stuck on a kids ward or whatever, but suddenly as a parent that guilt and everything just ramps up. And with the pandemic, my wife working in a hospital, she couldn't take time off, and it took a long while. But I think looking back, I just wish I'd have treasured that time. I had people messaging me saying, you are so lucky, you get to spend months in the best years at home with your son, and I didn't appreciate it. And now I realize all the stuff that's happening today, and the motivation and the energy he gives me, because you know I'm practically at this point working 2 jobs. It's all because of that bond that formed in them really early years. So I would say yes, it's going to be tough, especially if you flare or you have your mobility issues, but you can turn that into the most magical thing, and it can just be lying on the floor doing puzzles and letters and numbers all day. And it can be as simple as that.
Enjoy the moment. Enjoy the moment, because they're only little ones, and that quality of relationship makes such a difference as they get older as well. You won't lose that.
I definitely don't know his every time he wakes in the night he's asking for daddy. I definitely I don't know if that's such a benefit when you've been up 4 times in the night, but yeah, it does create a special sort of bond, and I wish I would have appreciated it more at the time.
And Katherine, have you found that?
It's only 3. You've got a long way to go yet. Don't keep yourself.
Do you find that, Katherine, now that Aidan's older, do you see that kind of the closeness you had when he was younger, because of the way you were playing with him and spending time with him, has that kind of led to changes now that he's older?
Very much so. I mean, we are close. We've always been close, and he's remained an only child, which I think probably contributes to that. But yeah, we spent a lot of time together. He didn't go to nursery till he was at 1, and then it was only sort of 1 day a week. So and I think they innately pick things up. They don't know it's not normal. So he didn't know it wasn't normal for me to do various things, but he's just really developed into a very kind young man. He is quite empathetic. He understands good days and bad days, because I do vocalize that. And he knows not to push things. So if I say I can't do something, there's no pressure. There are no guilt trips, to be honest, Joel, from that point of view. And we go for a walk, his dear old mum needs help over stiles, and he will stop and he will make sure. And if it's uneven ground or muddy, he's absolutely lovely. And that's second nature to him. He doesn't have to think about it. So, there are positives in developing character that a lot of 17-year-old young men don't have, I would say. So that was really, really positive from that point of view. And his thoughtfulness extends to other people as well. So that is definitely grown in his character. And from an early age, he was involved with St John Ambulance. And I think that had something to do with it, because he wanted to help other people.
And developing that empathy is so sort of valuable, because especially in terms of conditions like axial SpA and JIA and psoriatic arthritis, where they're essentially invisible conditions, unless obviously you have a splint or a brace or a mobility aid. It's yeah, it can be really difficult for people to really understand. So for him to have grown up developing that kind of empathy for people is incredibly valuable.
Particularly fatigue. So quite often, if I'm leading a Sunday morning service, I'll come home and I need to go to bed for an hour, and I will sleep, and it's not a problem. I mean, he's pretty self-sufficient now, but it's also not making a noise, not being disturbing. He knows, I just get left to it, and I think that's a really important lesson, to look out for the people that he's benefited from it.
Mm. And I mean, we've touched on this a little bit in terms of kind of mental health and kind of, you know, those difficult emotions with parenting, which, I mean, I imagine parenting, I'm not a parent myself, but I imagine you get these kind of challenging emotions pretty much daily. But we've touched on it a little bit. Is there anything that you've both found, you know, helpful in terms of kind of managing that and managing the impact? Any advice you could share? Perhaps Joel, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think what, in terms of like the family unit, or just for people watching, or a bit of both?
I think a bit of both. And when we chatted before, sort of talking about kind of managing when you can't do things, and just sort of mentally sort of managing that.
Yeah, so I think I think I might have mentioned earlier, but yeah, communication I think is the big one, because that, looking back, that year one, if you like, was the bit I just wasn't doing. I tried to, you know, it's very, looking back, quite typical male, and I felt like I had to be the sort of strong one, and I couldn't burden my wife with everything that she had gone through, and to be honest, I've done that for years with my arthritis, and it kind of took becoming a parent to change that. Like, I went full circle on it. For years I was in clubs and played sport with people who never knew I even had arthritis, because I didn't want to be judged based on this thing I had. I wanted to be judged on my own ability, sort of thing. So I think that's the one massive thing that's come out of this for me, is that I've learned to communicate, and a lot of it is, like I've tried to tell people before, is it's I don't want you to tell me what I should be doing, or suggest something, or whatever that remedy, that the first thing that comes to your head, you feel like you've got to offer something. You just need to ask me what I need. And so now, rather than and my wife will say, I don't always get it right, because I do whinge still, but rather than going around the house all day saying, oh, my knee hurts, or that rash has flared up, or this hurts, or that hurts, or I didn't get any sleep, now it'll be just a case of like, can you do the shopping, or can you walk the dog, or can you put Dylan to bed? And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it'll be like, well, can I do all of the naps, bedtime, because I can't stand in the kitchen and cook tonight, you know, and that sort of thing. So I think once I changed the angle, and pain management and therapy around that was like a big factor in me seeing it from a slightly different angle, because all of us will know that feeling of, you've got to tell someone. There's only so long you can keep it inside. You just want somebody else to, they're never going to experience your pain, but if you feel like by telling them you've shared it, but often that can end in disappointment, because it'll be like, say, have you tried this oil, or have you moved more, or you should eat less fatty food, and all these things that just don't help, but to hear for a millionth time. So once you start doing that whole, this is what I need, or this is how you can help me, I think that had a big impact and took a lot of pressure off my shoulders. And there's also ways you can spin it so that it's not a negative, you know. So when I lost my mobility, and I had to start carrying Dylan as an 18-month-old up and down the stairs on my backside because I had crutches in my hand, you turn it into a game, and you know, and touching upon, Katherine said that the empathy, you know, we're already seeing that, you know, with Dylan. So if he gets a little bit rough with his play, or his new thing is tools. So, and what the kids do when they got tools, they want to hammer your knee when you're sitting watching the telly. The first time he did it, I sort of sat and explained it. We don't talk to him like a kid, you know, some people will not agree with that. We talk to him like a person, and I explain that hurts daddy, or whatever. And because I talk through all of my stuff now, rather than trying to be this strong male that has no weakness, he now understands. So I will get my Humira out of the fridge, and daddy's gonna have his medicine, I mustn't touch, and he'll even take, like, he'll go and sit on his little desk that he's got that he eats his snacks on, because he knows he's not allowed near the needle. And so, yeah, communication, I think that I can't emphasize that enough, because that was my big downfall, I think, when I first became a parent.
Being clear and being specific is really important, because it's not just people don't know how you're feeling, but actually quite often they don't know what help you might need. And that was really interesting what you were saying, Joel. It's really important not just to have the energy to do the jobs bit and then miss out on the fun stuff. So if you can't do the jobs, but you're just going to have the fun, that's okay. Don't beat yourself up about it. Yeah. When you said stairs, I remember one of the things, we've got some quite steep stairs, and we all find ways of managing. So there's usually a pile at the top of the stairs and a pile at the bottom of the stairs, so that I only go up once or twice a day. At 3, 4, 5, the stairs were a godsend, because I would be having Aidan running up and down the stairs, and it would be one thing at a time, because that was his way of burning off energy, and I didn't have to do anything. So I'm very forgetful, and you might just have to go up and get that book because I've forgotten that book. So you're right, make it into a game really, really helps, because it takes the guilt away from you. It's useful to you. And they love it. They love being helpful. Most children really like being helpful, don't they?
Yeah, like tidying up. Like Dylan is an expert, and he loves it. When he's tired, maybe not, but that's the same when he's at his granddad's or whatever, and he's like, "Oh, you help me put all the tools away and all that sort of thing." And that's all because we've kind of had to do that to get by, because when I had that period on crutches, I didn't have my hands free. So and I think the important thing to remember is the world you create is all they know. So it doesn't have to be like the movies. You only have to go through the childbirth bit to know it's not the movies, and I was just watching. So what I would say is their world is what you create, especially in them young years. And and you'll start to, well, what I found anyway, Katherine, you probably more so, the older they get, the more you can see little threads back to what you had to do, what you thought at the time was to survive, but actually was setting really good sort of boundaries and standards and sort of like little models of respect and empathy that, like I say, at the time just felt like you were surviving, but actually has turned into a positive.
And I would say lockdown has re-emphasized that, because obviously with the medication we're on, we were vulnerable, and Aidan was very, very diligent in following all the washing the hands and the masks. So even I was thinking, so he had it at Christmas time, and as soon as he tested positive, he had his mask on the whole time, isolating. He knew what he needed to do, and he felt it was really important. In fact, he was encouraging his dad to be more diligent, so that was good.
Yeah. Handy. And something I mentioned at the beginning, in terms of, I mentioned the genetic side. Obviously we can't cover that, but I know that sort of something I've discussed with people on the helpline before is about kind of the worry about your child developing arthritis themselves. And we know there are lots of genes involved and lots of things that we can't control that's involved in that. And not everyone goes on to develop it, even with a family history. But how do you feel about this kind of as a parent, and how do you manage those worries, or any advice for anyone who might be watching who's kind of worried about that?
It's normal to be worried. I was really hyper attentive in the early years, and then when I got involved with NASS and we started going along to conferences, every time I had the opportunity to talk to somebody, I would talk to them about it, because it does hang over you. It's normal to feel guilty, even though there's nothing we can do about it. So I would say, yes, definitely much more hyper attentive. So Aidan is now 6'2", so there's quite a lot of him. But that means when he's standing on his feet a long time, actually it's not great for your back. So from fairly early on, we have talked about what aches and pains there are and how does it feel, whether it's a burning or a stabbing. And he's quite used to me doing Pilates. So from when he was very little, I used to have somebody come and do Pilates with me, and she would be entertaining him. I was doing a bridge and he'd be crawling underneath, and so he's well aware of Pilates and posture. We talk about a lot, and he's had massage and he's seen an osteopath, And that's just okay. It's nothing weird. Even as a 17-year-old, he knows if it makes him feel better, then it's worth pursuing it. But thankfully at the moment, no evidence of that. But yeah, but it's just normal. Don't beat yourself up about it, but just be, yeah, slightly more attentive. I think, Joel, you were talking, weren't you, when we first chatted, that you got concerned?
Yeah, I did, and I think, and I've got a slightly different angle because of the awareness sort of stuff I do. I hear lots of stories, like literally on a daily basis, messages coming in, and I know so many people that I know consider friends that have JIA, and their son or their daughter has got JIA, and in some cases multiple children, and this was the thing that was, you know, I didn't start a family until I was sort of 34, 35, probably pretty much for that reason, because I went a long while where I didn't want to be, you know, I didn't want to look into their eyes and see that every day if that was what happened. But back then I was very much living in this mindset, like I mentioned earlier, that I just didn't talk about it and I hid it, and that was such an unhealthy way of dealing with it. Of course I saw it as such a negative thing, but no, like we've talked about earlier, you see all the characteristics that can come from that, empathy and everything. You see it in a different light. But I think, yeah, when Dylan was young, and he is at that, you know, we are very much, he's 3, so we're very much in the lion stage, and if daddy talks a lot about aches and pains, you better believe the next day he's got aches and pains. So you sort of do have to sort of come to, and like I say, that's where it comes in again about getting down to his level and talking to him, not sort of like talking to him like a baby, because I'll be, so what we'll do, he'll say, oh, my neck hurts, and me and my wife will look at each other, knowing full well that my neck hurt the day before. So we're like, oh, okay, what about your knee, does that hurt? Yeah, that hurts. And what about your foot? Yeah, that hurt. And then you sort of, right, okay, we'll stop worrying about that. But he did one particular thing where he spent about a week walking with his hand behind his back, like I would if my back would ache. And I didn't think at the time he'd seen that. And I was so paranoid. Every time he was standing at the telly, he had his hand on his back, and I got myself so worried about it. And then I spoke to other parents and realised, okay, they just, when they realise they can do something new with their body, they do it, and then they stop doing it. It was a bit like when he thought he could do a forward roll at about 18 months old and nearly broke his neck. He'd done that for like a week solid and then got bored of it. And it was the same with holding his back. So I think, you know, and I could do other things. The amount of times I've got the back of my hand thinking he's got a hot knee, and I know I only do that because I've seen my rheumatologist do it to me, and that's because he's been kneeling, you know, and obviously he's got a hot knee. So I think what I would say is that wears off. It definitely did for me. Year 1 and 2, I was hypersensitive to it, hyper alert to it. And I know a little bit of it was fueled by the connections I've got with the community and the stories I hear and everything. It was kind of feeding it a little bit. So what I would say is get out there with other regular people off the street, parents who have all got lots of different experiences, because I think my mistake probably was, especially because of pandemic, I didn't have a lot of options, socialising with purely parents of sort of families with arthritis and everything. I got a very sort of, I didn't get a very sort of mixed experience. As soon as the world opened up a little bit and I could start speaking to other parents, and I went back to work, and you realised all this stuff's normal, but we are going to be a little bit hypersensitive to it. So I'd say don't beat yourself up. Like Katherine said, it's completely normal. It's human. Why wouldn't you be worried about that sort of thing? But after time, you do sort of switch off a little bit and relax, and you don't realise you're relaxed. It just sort of happens.
But then that's part of parenting anyway. If it wasn't AS, it would be meningitis, or it would be, you know, there are multiple things that parents worry about all the time, particularly when it's your first child. It is hard because it's a huge responsibility. So, and actually, if you've got a good doctor, talk to them. I mean, when I had Aidan, we still had health visitors, and she was absolutely amazing, the health visitor. She would sit and listen to me and help me with all sorts of things. So find somebody that you can talk to who you trust, because lots of people will be dismissive and say, oh, you know, you're paranoid about it, and others, you just need that balance. You want somebody who's balanced, who will listen to you, but also knows a bit about what they're talking about.
I can definitely slightly empathise with that, in that I've got a relatively new experience of being an auntie with a 9-month-old nephew, and completely. I remember sort of I'd be looking after him and I'd think, oh, it's not made that noise before. Like, what does that mean? And yeah, once you get that experience and you're like, okay, I know what normal is now, it gets a little bit easier. But yeah, definitely on high alert for a while.
Yeah, and like Katherine say, you are with any new parent is, you know, literally like your first fever, you're freaking out. The first time they sleep through, you know, literally even the good stuff you think is terrible because you think it's a difference from the norm. So that's it is just unfortunately just a bit amplified, I think, because of our experiences. But don't beat yourself up at it. It's okay.
And it changes a bit as they get older. But so Aidan went skiing in sort of year 7, year 8. And when he came back, he was really, really struggling with his knee joints. And that, again, I suddenly thought, oh, right, okay. But he just needed some exercises. He just needed to strengthen them because he wasn't a very physical boy at that age. So sometimes it's straightforward.
Yeah, and I imagine the sooner you get that opinion and put your mind at rest, it makes it a lot better.
Absolutely.
I'd also say as well, just to add on the end of that as well, that it changes your routine and activity as well. So it can also work the other way, and that you think, oh, I'm having this massive flare, but you realize, okay, I've just never had to bend over and keep lifting this little thing out of a cot at this weird angle, you know. So the first couple of months with the Moses basket, I had bad back. It had nothing to do with my arthritis. It was just because we were up and down like yo-yos all night. And you know, and it's that sort of thing. It's really hard to cut through, especially in them early years of what the of what's normal, what's not. And so yeah, finding some diversity of opinions, I think, would be my advice.
Absolutely, it's a great workout. Newborns. And so a lot of these Facebook Live sessions, we talk about ways we can self-manage our AS and arthritis, and look at different techniques and things. I imagine this must be really difficult, particularly when your children are younger and before school age. How do you kind of balance that between looking after children and looking after yourself as well? Katherine, do you want to go first with that?
Yes, I'm probably not a good example because as with most mothers will say, you put your children first. So I was forever saying, oh no, I can't go on the course at the Mineral Hospital because I can't leave him for 2 weeks or a week. Or exercise sessions, particularly for the NASS groups, all seem to be at sort of 6 o'clock, either in Swindon or in Bristol. And it was just like, well, it's not going to happen. So it's getting through the bits that you can't do and find the bits that you can do. So I found somebody who could come and do Pilates with me, which was great. We've got a special needs school who had a hydrotherapy pool, and they were happy for me to take Aidan, and he thought it was fantastic, and a nice warm swimming pool all to ourselves most of the time. So I guess it's about being organised, but also being realistic with anything, whatever condition it is, even if you're stressed at work, that if you don't look after yourself, you can't be a good parent to your children. So you do have to make an effort to be organised and use your energy wisely and your time wisely. And I can say that with hindsight. It takes a long time, and you think you're doing okay, and then suddenly you go, oh, I had a terrible flare up with my uveitis in the autumn, and you think, yeah, I knew what the signs were. I knew it was coming. Why didn't I just behave? Because what do? On our good days, we enjoy our good days and think the bad days are behind us, and then we do too much, don't we? But online courses I think were really helpful, and I've really loved these things through the pandemic. I mean, it would have been a completely different experience as a younger mum if I'd been able to look at things online when it fitted in. So yeah, there are lots of good things that are available now that you can slot into your timetable when your children finally go to sleep.
And they will at some point, I promise.
They will. You can't wake them up.
It will. Yeah, I would add to that, like I think becoming a parent, my route, and I have to have quite a strict routine, which I can go into a little bit if you want. But so my routine and pace and just completely went out of the window, and I slipped straight into that boom and bust cycle that Katherine was sort of mentioning. And looking back again, hindsight, a lot of my flair I blamed on becoming a parent, and or a lot of the emphasis was more on like the biosimilar switch, the treatment change at the time. But looking back, I stopped doing all the stuff that worked for me. You know, literally the first. Within 2 weeks of becoming a parent, I stopped playing rugby, or stopped doing sport. I started worrying, I can't afford to get injured. Now I've got a newborn. What if I break my arm? Looking back, I should have just carried on, because I was back on crutches in 6 months and didn't have my arms anyway. So, you know, it was that sort. I realised if I'm having like a real honest conversation with myself, a lot of that stuff I stopped before the pain stopped it. And you know, that whole, I have to have a morning bath, like cook myself in the bath, and then I have all my moisturizer routine because of the PSA bit of it, and that all stopped. And obviously it stops. You know, you put this little new life that in front of you first, and remember back then I was still trying to be this hero that was completely unsustainable, and I think it's normal for that stuff to change, but you have to try and keep the essentials in. And I didn't. You know, I could have fitted in my bath if I didn't let the whole guilt thing completely consume me, and felt really bad for leaving my wife for 10 minutes, you know, and we could have worked way around it. You know, we could have all sat in the bathroom and I could have scolded myself, and then when the water cooled, they could, whatever. There are ways around it. And I think that the important bit is knowing your routine, what has to stay, and prioritize that. So for me, walking's a really big thing. If I don't walk, and some days I do skip it because the feet are sore, I get a lot of problems with my heels, but I know there's going to be a bit of a payback the next day for that. So in years 2, I talk about loads of projects, but it's just easier for me to remember. Year 1, year 2, year 3, it felt like chapters. You know, I really upped my walking and got to walking 5 miles a day. So if I'd done nothing else, if I didn't have my bath, didn't do anything else, I at least done my walking. And that's the same with like your medication routine. The amount of times I'd get to like nap time in the middle of the day and realised I hadn't taken any of my pills because my focus was purely on him. But looking back, it would have took seconds. You know, it literally would have took seconds. It wouldn't have inconvenienced him or my wife if I'd have stuck to that routine. So yeah, I think work out what your priorities are, what works for you, what in your routine is essential, and try and maintain as much as you can. And if you can't, you can still fit things in. I thought because I wasn't playing rugby and going to the gym, I might as well just give up, and the weight piled on and everything. But looking back, I could have still done stuff at home. You know, Joe Wicks proved that when COVID hit. You know, there was still plenty of things I could have done, but I took the easy option. I was tired, I was stressed, I was worried about this new life, and all them things that are totally normal that come with being a parent. And I didn't prioritize my long-term health condition. And yeah, so when I talk about medication changes and this sort of thing, I now do that, but knowing full well I contributed to my flare and my loss of mobility, and ultimately I got me into that, and it was only me that could get me out of it by moving more and finding more time for me. So even if it's something small, you know, going in the kitchen to have a cup of tea and a biscuit without being interrupted is not finding time for your condition. You know, find whatever it was you used to do, even if you have to knock it down to 25%, try and maintain it. I think that would be my thing.
And I think it's also remembering it's not forever. You say this too will pass. It won't be long before, you know, Dylan's at school and your routine changes again. So it's trying to be a bit more intentional, isn't it? And saying, right, okay, so now I have this time and I need to make sure that I'm using it wisely so that I can give up my time when they come home from school and they're really excited or really tired and don't mind having a nap at 4 o'clock in the afternoon because they're tired too. So it's, yeah, I think it's just being really kind to yourself and go, well, there are things that you could do and it will change and it will keep change. So I made a real effort to make sure that Aidan was doing active clubs, whether it was after school or holiday clubs, things he was having a chance to do, opportunities that I couldn't provide for him otherwise, because there's all sorts of stuff out there, so that you don't feel that they're missing out. So, yeah.
A good way to burn energy as well.
Absolutely.
I'd just say as well, like, don't forget that, again, I know we talked about it already, but the mental side of that, you know, because I thought, oh, I'd done all this sport and that to stay physically fit and active. I didn't realize how much the social side played a part of the good management of my condition and just me in general. So, you know, even if it's just, you know, finding time to still read, if that's your thing, or for me, over lockdown, I started writing, and that become a bit of a escape for me. So I'd say, yeah, also amongst all the physical and all the million things you're juggling as a parent, try and find something that ticks the mental sort of well-being break box as well for you.
Absolutely, that's incredibly helpful. And I mean, thank you both so much for sharing your experiences, because as I said at the beginning, it is, you know, it's a really personal topic. And yeah, I really appreciate you both giving up your evening to talk with us about it and share.
You're very welcome. That's really helpful to hear somebody else's experience and compare down the line as well. But it will change again, Joel.
Oh yeah, I'm in fluid mindset now. Before I was very structured, routine, and now it is just, yeah, I adapt.
I know that feeling just from having a weekend with my nephew. You sort of think, yeah, we'll do this today, and then yeah, the day comes and you're like, what happened?
Yeah, best laid plan. When you think you can have that lovely trip at the zoo and you're there 10 minutes or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is just parenting.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Was there anything else that we haven't kind of covered? Any sort of final takeaways either of you wanted to share? We've already covered lots.
We've covered a lot, but we've only touched on our partners, and I guess we'll have lots of different experiences, and when you're new parents anyway, it's really hard. When your partner has to cope with you finding life difficult, it's really hard. So just being aware, whether it's an appreciation of the other half or just being really honest with them. Joel talked quite a lot about communicating. We need to communicate clearly. And I was very lucky. My husband would let me go away for a weekend. So I'm not the big active type. I need mental headspace. And so from when Aidan was quite young, it was okay for me to go away for a weekend on retreat, just to have that quiet, that space, so that I then got the energy for coming back. So yes, don't forget your partners.
Yeah, sometimes I think I often, especially in the earlier periods, I felt like a second child sometimes and beat myself up a lot about that. And it kind of, and if you're not doing all that communication stuff, it can kind of get to that point where, you know, your partner might not tell you when they're struggling because they don't want to burden you, and that's heartbreaking when you have that conversation. But a lot of people, I'm sure, watching this will relate to that, because, you know, they know you're living this life in and out of pain and plans being scrapped, and you've got this new baby, and the last thing they want to do is add to it. And yeah, that's heartbreaking when you find out, you know, that there was maybe something you could have helped with, because nobody stopped to sort of ask your partner. Because, and we do get wrapped up in, you know, I do, like I talked about, going around the house every day saying what hurt, and it wasn't healthy, but it was just how I dealt with it at the time. And it can become a lot about the condition rather than the family unit, I think. So that's a really good point, Katherine. Yeah,
that's really, really good to share that. Although I will say I'm a big advocate for the occasional therapeutic moan. I think every now and then, a bit of an offload for anyone, even without arthritis.
Yeah, I just do it one. I know, say that I afford myself like 1 day a week or 1 weekend a month to be absolutely miserable, and then I move on. So that tends to be my thing.
Perfect. Oh, that's been fantastic. I'll just check the chat and just see if we've had any questions coming in. I did see a comment earlier from Gillian, who's watching. Hi Gillian, thanks for joining. And she she agreed, as we were saying sort of earlier in the conversation, about sort of turning making a positive out of a negative. I think that was when we were chatting about sort of playing and sort of looking at things in a different way. So yeah, she definitely agreed. We do have a question from Joe, who's asking about your 11-year-old has started to have back pain, and asking if there's a way to have her checked. So I'll just answer that. Is it would probably be good if you drop me an email, zoe@nass.co.uk. Probably best if we have a chat specifically about that, and I can give you some personal advice there. Yeah, and Dale's sharing he's got a 1, 4 and 7-year-old, and he's lucky his wife is a saint, so that's lovely to hear. And Jane's saying no children but a very understanding and supportive husband. That's lovely to hear. That's important whether you have children or not, isn't it? Wonderful. So yeah, we don't have any questions coming in. I did, we chatted about this beforehand as to whether people would be comfortable sharing things publicly, but if anyone has any other questions, then please do feel free to either give our helpline a call. I've popped the details in the video description, or if you add comments to the comment section, I'll keep an eye on those over the coming days as well, so we can always answer those individually. So wonderful. Before we finish up then, I'll just let everyone know that our next Facebook Live is going to be this coming Friday, the 11th at 1 p.m. and I'll be chatting with Alison Drury and our CEO, Dr. Dale Webb, about our patient value survey that you have probably seen all over our social media feed. I'll have a chance to answer all your questions then. So I think that's everything, unless you have anything else you wanted to share.
No, I don't think so, thanks.
No, it's just thanks for facilitating such an important topic. So I think it gets overlooked sometimes, that, like I say, the wider family unit with our conditions. So yeah, everything you're doing is vitally important. So thank you, Zoe.
Thank you both for joining as well. As I said, really appreciate talking about such a personal topic, and yeah, from the number of views we're getting, definitely a conversation that I think has been really helpful for people to hear, and hopefully given some practical tips as well. So thank you both so much. I'll end the live stream there, but thank you everyone for watching, and yeah, see you on Friday.